Well, it's been more than 100 days since Parliament sat, 113 to be exact. Strategists say all those days were supposed to put distance between the government and the Senate scandal. Trouble is, the scandal keeps making headlines. Andrew, Chantal, and Bruce are all here tonight. It's topic one. There are legs and there are legs, and this story just keeps growing legs.
Yeah, when you've got police investigations and ethics inquiries, there's a lot of moving pieces here. Some of it one suspects being fed by some of the players in this, leaking emails, et cetera, for whatever reasons and private agendas they may have. But it's not just, of course, Senator Duffy, it's also Senators Wallin and Brazeau, it's the continuing robocalls affair, it's all these swirling questions around Arthur Porter, who, for some reason, the Prime Minister appointed as head of the Security Oversight Commission. There's an accumulating critical mass, let's say, of ethical lapses, of curious appointments, of suspicions of cover-ups that have essentially, I think, dispelled whatever aura the government might have had coming in as the clean broom, the people who are going to clean up the scandals of the past administration.
There is this sense that, we've seen a summer with the cabinet shuffle, with the throne speech now set for next week, that the government has really tried to reset the agenda, but at the same time you get the sense that by the time the first question period's on, they're going to be still at the Senate story.
Well, it's a rare throne speech that captures the imagination of very many people for more than 24 hours, and mostly because we treat it as something important, as we should, but beyond that, where would you go? The notion that putting 100 days between what happened in the spring on the Senate and today, and there would be distance, is like saying that you're watching The Sopranos and you're left with, the gun pointed at one of the protagonists, and when the season starts again, you're not going to be interested to know what's happening. It's just words. There is no distance to be put there. Andrew is right. I don't think we will see senators appointed anytime soon, but I think the government, if it wants to get ahead on the Senate, will have to do more in the throne speech than to just say we're waiting for the Supreme Court to tell us what to do. That's not going to do it. And I agree that appointments have become an issue, including, for a very different reason, what happened to the Supreme Court appointment that just took place and that is now on hold because it's being challenged in the courts of all places. So, yeah, it's the competence of the government to do what is basic to a government, to appoint people in the right places, that is now in question.
Bruce?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the opposition parties are going to continue to try to mine this whole collection of stories around the Senate, and it looks like a very renewable resource for them, and it's a gift that's going to keep on giving for a long time to come because of the various processes that are underway. I think for the government, really, there's two issues. One is what to do about the Senate, and I think their proposition isn't really going to go anywhere for all the reasons that we've talked about here before, the court challenges that are likely and so on. And so the second option for them is how do we stop talking about it? And I think that's going to be very, very difficult. But I still think at the end of the day, the biggest single risk for the Prime Minister and for his government is any revelations that go to, has he been telling the truth about what he knew about this? And all of the other stuff will be an annoyance, a dull toothache, if you like. That is the central issue still to be explored.
And the irony of all ironies is the throne speech happens in the Senate, one of the few times in the parliamentary calendar where you actually get a glimpse inside the place, and you just know the cutaways that are going to be taken by the television cameras will be, assuming they're there, Duffy, Wallin, Brazeau. It's going to be quite a day.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it shouldn't be the question of the day as what did the Prime Minister know and when did he know it, because even if he didn't know it, that raises a whole range of other issues. But he staked such turf on this absolute flat-out declaration of I knew nothing until May the 14th. And more and more has come out of people around the Prime Minister who knew at least something well before that date, including, for example, his legal counsel, who would have been apprised, one assumes, that there were things of questionable legality going on. And it's remarkable, let's say the least, if he would not have informed the Prime Minister that there were incidents of questionable legality going on.
And the more you hear about all the energy that his Chief of Staff seemed to put on the issue, the less likely it becomes that he wouldn't at some point have told the Prime Minister, this is very messy and, this is where it's at, because that is, I think, part of the information that has been coming out that is damaging politically is that Nigel Wright asked a lot of questions, got binders of emails. At some point, you must tell your boss what you're doing if you're a Chief of Staff.
Yeah, it's become clear through the summer and again this week that in spite of the kind of declarations that there were no documents that related in any way to this, turns out there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents because Nigel Wright handed them over. How he got those out of the Prime Minister's office after being fired, I'm not quite sure. Topic 2. It's been a remarkable week with all the talk about spying. You know, has Canada been spying on Brazil? Brazil says, yes, they have been. The Prime Minister is saying he's very, very concerned, which is an interesting answer on a number of levels, but it doesn't actually answer the question whether or not we have been. And the people at CSEC, the security establishment, are not saying. What is this story? What do you make of this story?
Well, important to establish at the outset that we don't know what actually has been going on. What we do know is that the head of the agency that is alleged to have been doing this espionage is saying, we can't really tell you what we do, but we can tell you that we operate within the law, which I think is actually begging the question, well, what exactly does the law permit? My own take is that if we are involved in espionage that is about something other than protecting our national security, in other words, that it's about finding economic opportunity by mining somebody else's information, I don't think Canadians have bought into that as an idea of how we grow our economy, and I think there'll be if not hell to pay, there'll be serious public opinion repercussions, and the government is probably, at this point, trying to find out exactly what's going on and devise some sort of strategy for coping with this issue, if in fact it turns out that that's what's been going on.
If for no other reason, that's what we've been saying others shouldn't be doing to us.
We can't lecture other countries about industrial espionage, state-sponsored or otherwise, and be found to be doing the same thing ourselves and think it's okay.
The problem with acts like that is that there is always room for interpretation. And so, yes, you can be acting within the scope of the law as you interpret it, and it lends itself to those interpretations. Normally, you would know what an agency is doing, and you could compare it to the law, and you could challenge that. At this point, this obviously is an operation that requires a certain amount of secrecy and distance. So I'm not sure that even political masters are fully aware of the extent that you can take the interpretation of the law, and who will challenge it, really, because it does take place between a judge, a retired judge, and the agency, but it doesn't allow itself or lend itself to a lot of oversight. And I think at the very least there will be queries as to whether more oversight is not required.
I'm not as clear as Bruce that you can draw a bright line between national security and mere economic espionage. From what I understand, it's more common than we understand, certainly not just in our country, but in other countries if they're doing it to us. I'm not sure I want to be completely the Boy Scout on the matter. It seems to me it depends on the nature of it. I agree we don't want our government, stealing other companies' trade secrets. But if we're in trade negotiations, for example, and the other guys know everything that we're discussing, we don't know anything that they're discussing, I'm not sure, as I say, I want to be the Boy Scout there. But I agree the issue ultimately is, what is the mandate? And we can discuss how far we want to go into economic things, but whatever the mandate is, it should stay within the bounds that Parliament has laid out. And we want to know that there's some oversight mechanism to make sure they stay within that. And I think there are legitimate questions that this has raised, at least in terms of popular awareness, that legitimate to looking further into this and making sure that we do have the proper oversight mechanisms.
I just want to be sure that I understand where you're drawing the line, because I think what Bruce is suggesting is, look, you can't go around lecturing, as we seem to have been doing the Chinese, right, for example, for the last couple of years, about looking at us and the way our economic businesses, where their industrial complexes operate, and then be seen to be doing the same thing.
But every country, it seems to me, plays pretends to be the piano player in the horror house on this, that they all are shocked when they discover that other guys have been doing it. I think to some extent that's inevitable. There's only so much that you can police other countries' actions in this regard. I think a certain amount of discreet hypocrisy has been part of this from the beginning. And what happens, of course, is if you get caught, then you do a little tit for tat, expelling each other's diplomats. And it seems to me that's the mechanism the international community has evolved for keeping this within some kind of bounds. So yeah, we don't want it to be everything goes, we're spying on everybody 6 ways to Sunday. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we think we can, by setting a good example, for example, get everybody else to do the same.
If I thought we could develop some sort of consensus about what it was all right for China to do to us and what China was okay to do to us, we could do to Brazil, I might buy that argument more fully. But I think that there is a real, whether you call it Boy Scoutism or not, there will be a morality question here for many Canadians, which will be, what is a line that we should draw for ourselves, even if the Chinese don't draw that line for themselves?
I agree with that. I'm just saying I don't think it necessarily excludes all economic espionage.
But I think the fallout from this, I think discreet hypocrisy are operative words in this, in the sense that you don't want to be found out because it does do damage to your diplomatic relations, and they happen on other bases than commercial basis. But I'm not convinced, as Bruce is, that we will hold our services to a higher standard rather than push them further into the dark so that they don't get found out. I think that the pain in government this week is not that we may have been doing something that is over the line, but that we were found out.
What has surprised you about the way this story has unfolded? I mean, you talked about in the old days, you'd see one country, you know, saying, okay, you're out of here, and they'd kick out a bunch of diplomats. It didn't happen from Brazil. They called in the ambassador, talked to him, and that was it.
Right.
Or at least so far.
Well, Brazil may be conscious that they were caught spying on Bombardier in Montreal a few years ago. So again, are they in a position to be lecturing other people? I think, as I say, I think you probably calibrate your response to the severity of the offense. If this was, you know, a much worse thing, they'd be doing much more severe things back to us, but maybe they feel they can keep this within certain bounds.
What about the Prime Minister's response? How do you interpret the I'm concerned, I'm very, very concerned?
Well, either one of two things. One is that he doesn't yet know all of the details about what's going on, and so he's doing the prudent thing, which is to try to ascertain what the facts are. Or he knows that the answer that is factual is not innocuous in terms of its impact in public opinion. In other words, that there's not an easy explanation to give Canadians for why this might be happening. I don't know which of those two it is, but I do think the question is, for me, what was surprising to me, it's that this story has been out now for a day anyway, and nobody has yet stepped forward with an explanation for why, if we were doing this, not only was it within the law, but why it's the right thing for us to be doing. And you would think that being prepared to answer these questions is something that should have occurred to people before now.
You get the last word.
Well, I think the Prime Minister could not have answered anything except that he is very concerned because he's playing to two audiences, Brazil at this point and Canada. I'm, like Bruce, a bit surprised that there wasn't much of moving forward ahead of this story, but I suspect that's probably because trying to do so would probably do more damage on the Brazilian front than it would fix for Canadians. It's kind of a balancing act. It's precarious here.
All right, we'll see whether it gets picked up in question period next week. Thank you all.